Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very, very warm welcome to today's BA Community webinar. We're going to be talking about a topic that's created quite a stir in the professional community. It's probably a topic that, if you're tuning in, is very close to your heart. I know it's a topic that's very, very close to my heart. We're going to be talking about agile estimation, and this is always controversial about how much estimation we should do, how estimation works, and so I'm really, really pleased that this is a topic we're able to talk about today. Before we get started, it's worth mentioning that we will be taking questions towards the end of the session, but do feel free to type your questions in at any point. The chat is also open, so if you're attending live, feel free to say hello to everyone else on the webinar in the chat, and you can have that kind of side conversation going as well. So I'm really, really pleased to introduce Stuart Mann. Now, I was fascinated when I saw Stuart's bio, because Stuart describes himself as a reformed waterfall guy who's now a passionate agile coach. And I think this will resonate with many of us who perhaps grew up with waterfall methods, and now we're balancing that with that experience in agile environments or wagile environments or hybrid environments, or wherever we happen to be. But what also interested me is Stuart's also a compulsive marathon runner, having run over 240 marathons and ultra marathons, which, I mean, kudos, because I can't imagine ever running that many in my life. You may well be familiar with his blog. If you're not, we'll provide a link to that later. It's well worth a look. And I really like, Stuart, how you relate agility, analysis, estimation to your experience as a runner. So Stuart, thank you so much for being here. So I'm really pleased you're able to take time out.
No, my pleasure. Sometimes people say to me, well, what do you think about running all these marathons? And you'll find out in the next hour. So,
yeah. And just before we kick off, one thing to mention, people who are regular attendees of these webinars will be familiar with this, but what I'm going to do in just a moment, I'm going to put in the chat a link to a mural board. Now, if you're not familiar with mural, you can just literally click through to that. It's like a shared mural whiteboard. If you double click on there, you can add like sticky notes, and it's a great opportunity to collectively take notes. So as Stuart's talking, if there's a topic that really resonates with you or a point, add it to the mural board, because then what we have is like a collective set of notes that I'll share on LinkedIn after the event. And do remember to type questions in the Q&A as we go along as well, and feel free to chat to other attendees in the chat as well. So Stuart, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Adrian. So we get a nice introduction, but there's everything you need to know about one slide. So I'm an agile coach. Early morning, a compulsive marathon runner. I'm a father of 2 girls, husband of 1 wife, and I'm a trainee feminist, and that's not just a survival tactic at home. So I think having daughters changes your perspective on things. My lofty lifetime ambition is to secure a beer sponsor. Hasn't happened yet, but you never know if you put it out there to the universe. My contact details are there, always keen to connect with anyone. I will try and tie all of that, which is on the screen now, into today's talk. Even the beer. Unfortunately, I'm actually in the office because we've got rolling blackouts at the moment, so I can't have a beer right now. Otherwise, I would be enjoying a beer. It's about 8:30 at night in Johannesburg, South Africa, which is where I'm from. Now, I know people like to kill misconceptions in these webinars and these talks. So sometimes people think that, in South Africa, maybe there are lions roaming the streets. So I can assure you that they're not. But I did once have a lion cub living at my house. So if you have no other questions to ask at the end, you can ask me about that. I will actually be using African wildlife as well to illustrate some of the concepts today. Great. So first question for you, and I'd love to just see some answers into the chat. Why would we estimate? Why should we spend any time and effort actually estimating? Why bother with estimating in the first place. Okay, planning, JJ, yeah, that's part of it. See if there's any other, understand the timeline. Yeah. Cool. Client work and tenders, okay, cool. Understanding the effort of each team member, reality check, plan the work, cool. Understand how big the change is. So all correct. And there's probably one word that summarizes that up altogether. Okay. And kind of half came through. I'll give you the exact word I was looking for, is predictability. So we want to create predictability. I did see someone said, Erin, you said prioritization. So at a team level, it's about creating predictability. So if you're doing a sprint, an iteration, or even longer than that, you want to try and get some predictability in delivery. However, if you are trying to prioritize amongst a number of larger things, then yes, definitely prioritization is good for estimation. So value divided by size. Okay, so I'm really going to look today at the team level, which is really around this predictability. Okay. So I did mention I'd try and kill some misconceptions. So the first one here is that it's not a sprint, it's a jog. Okay. And in fact, in our work life, if you're not in your real life running marathons, your work, you're definitely running marathons or probably ultra marathons in the kind of work that you're doing. Now, if you think about it, a sprint is actually pretty easy to do. It's a short burst of energy. The problem is after that, you doubled over, gasping for breath, and you can't run anymore. And even if the last time that you did any running was when you were forced to by some sadistic physical education teacher in school, we can all still sprint. If we're late for a bus or something like that, we can do that short burst of energy. Now, to illustrate why it's more of a jog than a sprint, I'm going to use undoubtedly the greatest marathon runner of all time, Kipchoge. So, yeah, pretty much done everything that you could ever want to do in the world of marathon running. And a couple of years ago, he became the first human being to run a marathon. So that's 42.2 kilometers, 26 miles in under 2 hours. So absolutely phenomenal achievement. Now, it's not a world record because he did do so in slightly artificial conditions. He had paces. It wasn't a competitive race and a few other things, but still fantastic achievement. Now, at the bottom of the screen there is a press from the press release after the event. And you can see how they're basically saying that his pacemaker is a timing car. They pretty much went consistently 2 minutes 50 per kilometer throughout the race, and that he basically ran every kilometer split within a 4-second pace. So if you want to become the first human to go under 2 hours, he also does hold the official world record. Very similar, you'd see there obviously in competitive races, there's a bit more surging and tactics that come into play. But it's not about running fast. It's about running fast consistently. And really, that's what we're trying to do, is to get that predictability. Now, this actually isn't quite true, and I'll show you on the next slide why that's not the case. So they didn't publish his kilometer splits after the event, but they did publish the per 5 kilometers, okay, what time he went through each 5 kilometers. So what I've just done here, I've extrapolated that, and I've worked out an average velocity or pace per kilometer over each of those splits. And you'll see all of those 5 kilometers around between 250 and 251. With the exception being right at the end, the last 2.2 kilometers, he actually ran faster. Now, if he'd started out running 2:45, he wouldn't have broken 2 hours. He probably wouldn't even have finished. So once again, it's not about running fast. It's about understanding what your pace is and then running at that predictable pace. And in actual fact, the same holds true whether you are the greatest marathon runner of all time or just an average runner. If you want to achieve your optimal time over any distance, it's about understanding the pace and sticking to that. So next thing we're going to go on to is just talk about, everything's relative and how our brains work and why our brains are just better at relative size estimation than absolute estimation. So what is relative size? I'll give you the answer. So very, very simply, it's volume plus risk. Now, a lot of people forget about this part. They think it's just volume. We're going to start off looking at volume and we'll bring risk in later into the webinar. Why relative size? Okay, so I'm asking you plenty of questions. These ones over here, I'll ask them rhetorically, give you a break. I'm sure you've had a long day. So I'm going to illustrate this by an exercise. So there is a picture of a hippopotamus on your screen. It is not a trick photograph. This is a fully grown adult hippopotamus in the wild. Okay, so I'm not trying to trick you with a trick photograph. what I'd like you to do is to estimate how much this hippopotamus weighs, ideally in kilograms. So for those of you who haven't, and without Googling as well, so just what you can see on the screen there, pop into the chat your best guess as to what this hippopotamus weighs. So in kilograms, if you do need to convert it from pounds or a stone or something like that, then go for it. But this, okay, great. And immediately the first two giving us a nice wide variance already. So we've gone from 400 kilograms, 2 tons. Let's just see, we've got a high so far, 3.5 tons. Okay. See how many people we've got. We've got about 40 people on the call. So let's just see, let a few more people get their best guesses through. Okay, so I think 3.5 is still the highest. I think 400 is the lowest, lots in between. Okay. Right. Okay, so according to the source of all truth on the internet, otherwise known as Wikipedia, okay, and I can't tell from this angle, and I can't remember whether this is a male or female hippopotamus, but if it was a male, expect about 1,500 to 1,800 kilograms, female about 1.3 to 1.5 tons. Okay, so that would be your expected weight range. Obviously, estimate, best guess, based on your current knowledge, what you can see. The only way we would get an accurate measure if we put this specific hippopotamus on a scale when exactly after the photo was taken. Obviously, that's impossible to do. Yeah, maybe it's this photograph was taken pre-COVID, so I don't know how. Maybe it would weigh a lot more after COVID, Jason. I certainly do. Okay, so now for the second part of this exercise, we're going to do a relative size estimate. So if this hippopotamus is a 3, okay, what is the rhinoceros relative to it? So, and don't worry about Fibonacci. If you want to use fractions, that's also perfectly okay. So obviously, simply a similar 3 or close to that. If you think the rhinoceros is slightly smaller, 1, 2, or a fraction thereof, bigger, 4, 5, or whatever number you want to go to. The numbers coming through seem to be coming through a bit faster. Okay. Great. So quite a few have come through. Let's just see the ranges. Okay. So I think our low is 1. We've got a high of 5. They seem to be slight outliers. Only one there, 1.5. Okay, cool. We'll go. Right. So once again, according to Wikipedia, quite a wide range. So a white rhinoceros would be about 1,600 to 2,400 kilograms for a fully grown white rhinoceros. So it is a white rhinoceros, Michael, this one over here. So actually, I'll do a quick deviation. So the interesting thing is white rhinoceros and black rhinoceros in South Africa. It's got nothing to do with the color of their skin. It's actually a mispronunciation. So the Dutch called it a wit rhino, W-I-I-D, because it's got a wide mouth. It grazes, the white rhinos graze the grass. They've got like a lawnmower mouth. They suck up the grass, whereas the black rhino's got a beak and it eats leaves. So when the English arrived in South Africa, they heard wheat and they just thought it's white and they called it a white rhino. So actually, that's how the white rhino got its name. Cool. Right. So yeah, probably everyone could probably be within the range of those estimates that we gave there. But now, what I actually want to do with this exercise is to reflect back what just happened inside your brain. So let's do a bit of an action replay. So just think about what happened when I asked you how much does this hippopotamus weigh. Now, unfortunately, I can't see anyone. Okay, if I do this in a classroom environment, I can obviously often see, I can see people, but it's likely it was uncomfortable and it induced a stress response in your brain. So often, some people would have folded their arms, they would have, rubbed their chin, looked up at the ceiling. The number that you came up with, you probably weren't that comfortable with it. Probably fairly low confidence in the estimate. It probably would have been much more of a guess than an estimate. If you think about the numbers that came through, quite a wide variance. So I think 400 kilograms to 3.5 tons. Normally, the bigger the group, the bigger the variance. If I had to plot that on a scattergram, the numbers would be all over the show. Also, normally it takes a bit of a longer time to get estimates out of people for the absolute estimate, just because it is a harder process to go through inside your brain. It's normally also harder to get people to estimate. So it takes slower, harder to get people to estimate. If I do this in a classroom environment, face to face, then normally some people who refuse to estimate. They say, no, I don't know. I don't want to estimate. I'm uncomfortable estimating. The interesting thing is that there is someone who comes up with an estimate very, very fast. And if I don't know the group of people, I'll normally say, I bet you the manager. And invariably, there will be a manager of the area, because managers are pretty free and easy when it comes to estimates. People doing the work are normally much more reserved when it comes to estimating. Okay, then the next, when I asked the second part, okay, which was obviously the relative size estimate, it was probably much, much easier. It should have been much easier. A number probably magically popped into your head, and you might have just spent a bit of time verifying it. The numbers definitely came through faster on the chat. I wasn't able to count them. They're just too many to see if more came through with the relative than the absolute, but normally that would be the case. Typically, there's a lower variance as well. So there'll be a bigger clustering around the numbers. Also, if I did this and we did a bit of conversation and asked people, why do you think it's 5? Why do you think it's a 1? And, someone might say, well, I lived in South Africa for a bit. I'm sure there may well be a couple of South Africans on the call. Maybe you spent last weekend in the bush and you got to compare them yourself. And it's probably quite easy to come up to that, okay, they're about the same size. Whereas even unless you were probably a game ranger, you probably wouldn't be that comfortable with the actual weight. And just really, as humans, we are better at comparing the size of two things. So it's faster, it's easier, it puts less cognitive load on us. It's generally a lot more accurate as well. This is why we want to try to do relative size estimates rather than absolute estimates. So we're much better at saying, compared to this thing we did last iteration or last week, last month, what is the size of this other thing? Okay, same size, bigger, smaller, and if so, by how much? As opposed to how long will something take? We're generally very inaccurate, and we're quite bad actually at knowing how long it will take. So that's kind of the key lesson for that. It took me a long time. I was training agile. It probably took me a couple of years to actually realize how this works, going through the motions, wasn't working with teams. And the key thing here is if you are doing relative size properly, you're not saying it's 5 days, therefore it's a 5. You're actually then if you're doing that, you're doing absolute estimates. You're doing this still. So you really want to say it's a 5 because it's the same size as the one we did last month. It's about the same size as that, which ended up being a 5. So therefore, this is also a 5. And obviously, what we could do, I'm just doing my bit for the South African tourism industry, which has taken a hammering during COVID. Okay, we could go through and compare a whole lot of different animals here. And it'd probably be quite easy. So you might have a bit of argument about how much bigger, but the elephant, I'm sure everyone will say that's the biggest, and the cheetah over here would be the lightest. Maybe a little bit of debate, but yeah, quite easy to start comparing a whole lot of different animals. Now, an even easier way potentially to show this, if you look at these 6 lines that are on your screen. And if I had to say to you, so don't worry about putting answers into chat because your screens will all be different sizes, but if I had to say to you, what is the total length of those 6 lines? Now, that's quite a hard process. You'd have to go through, take quite long. You wouldn't be that accurate if we did, even if we were all looking at the same screens, we'd probably have a wide variance on the answers. You wouldn't be that comfortable with the answers either. On the other hand, if I had to say to you, what is the average length of those 6 lines? You can look at 6 lines, which is quite a lot, and probably you go, oh, it's about this big. So my hands are disappearing. I'm in a dark room. So it's very, very easy to go and do that. Even though 6 is quite a large number, our brain's just very, very good at comparing things. It takes much, much harder, and we're generally less accurate if we have to go and do the absolute size of things. This specific exercise over here comes from this really, really good book, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. If you haven't read it, would highly recommend doing so. He's a psychologist, but he won the Nobel Prize for economics. So a lot of behavioral science, behavioral economics is based upon his work. Very, very interesting. Quite scary, actually, how our brains work and how easily manipulable we are with the way things are phrased. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is we've got a velocity exercise. Now, on the mural, there is I think the links are there. If you want to, you can do this exercise yourself. I'll just pop the link into the chat as well. The exercise file. So if you do want to download it, you can.
If you're on the mural, it's down the bottom left-hand side. There's a spreadsheet link. If you hover over the button, you can download it, or we'll put the link in the chat as well.
Thanks. I've just popped the link in the chat. I managed to get that in there. Yeah, if you want to do it, I'll be interested maybe afterwards if you give me your results. We won't do them now because I want to obviously just manage the time box and so, but I'll illustrate what typically happens. So in the exercise, you start off by just estimating, taking a nostalgic look back to when you used to travel to the office. I'm sure most people are still at home. So what would be your average speed from walking out the front door to getting to your desk? Okay, so estimate what that is. Okay, and even if you want to write it down now, because you can go through the rest of the exercise later. But this is the important one. Okay, just to estimate that your average speed, you can do it in the file will say kilometers an hour, but it'll work for miles an hour as well if you put miles inside there. Okay, so yeah, from walking out the front door to getting to your desk. And then what you can then do is do the distance. Okay, so obviously the distance should be a constant. And then the duration. Now, it might be quite hard the longer we go away, but some people do have GPSs. You can probably look back and your if you've got a GPS in your car, what your trip actually took. And that will then calculate for you your actual speed. Okay, so if you don't use the file, that's the formula over there. Now, what invariably happens is something like this. I've done this quite a number of times pre-COVID, and this is what the normal result. Most people will estimate that their estimated speed and their actual speed is a factor of 2. So most, and what I found working with teams as well, most teams take on twice the amount of work as what they can actually achieve in a set period of time. And most people will estimate that. Now, also bear in mind that original estimate. I said from walking out your front door to getting to your desk. Now, most people conveniently forget that. They just think about the car trip. So if you think about how slowly you go there, maybe you've got to wait for a garage door to open. Maybe you live in a complex, you've got to wait for gates to open and things like that. And maybe you work for a large corporate, you've got to park and do a substantial walk to your desk as well, which obviously is much slower than driving around. So if you really go and work out what that time is, it's probably even lower than that half. So I normally find even without people doing that, this is twice as high as what the actual is. The interesting thing with this is, even doing it pre-COVID, this is something we'll do hundreds of times a year, but still we are incredibly inaccurate. We've got the data often, and often if people do get it quite close, it's because they've gone through this calculation. They've actually done this calculation. When I started this exercise, I was actually sitting in traffic one day, standstill traffic, bored and flicking through the computer, not understanding half the things, but one of the ones was average speed and going, I wonder what the average speed was, and then going and looking. So that's where that one came from. Okay, so, and this then leads us into talking about risk. Now, when we did the exercise with the rhinoceros and the hippo, we purely looked at volume. But remember I said relative size is volume plus risk. And most agile training courses, regardless of which framework and which company you do it through, they do it with like animals or dogs or things like that. So they're purely doing volume. They're not taking in the risk factors. So what I just want to highlight is how big risk factors can sometimes be in influencing the relative size. So we'll stick with the commute. Okay, for many people, a nostalgic look back to that morning commute. Now, if you think about it, your velocity is the average speed of your journey. Okay, how do we calculate that? Well, it's time divided by volume. Now, volume is pretty much a constant. Because even if you change it slightly or something like that, it's not going to vary that much. But time obviously varies sometimes quite substantially. So if you think about it, the risk factors are what influence that time. That's why every single journey is not exactly the same, because of the risk factors. Now, obviously, driving to and from the office, there's quite a few different risk factors. So, there's things like the time of day you drive. You're driving in rush hour or outside of rush hour. You might be something that might have quite a big impact. If there's an accident on the road, big impact. Something's small impact. You're lucky or unlucky with traffic lights. Maybe you get stuck behind a slow truck for a bit. Hopefully not the whole way. But sometimes there might things like weather, obviously as well. Weather could influence it. Bad weather, people will hopefully drive slower. There's more risk of accidents and so on. Visibility is worse. Occasionally, you can have massive things that happen. So two specific ones that have happened to me. once a bridge collapsed on a highway. So that added on like hours to a journey. And also another big factor, if they're filming an Avengers movie in your downtown Johannesburg, which did happen a few years ago, they're filming some scenes also that meant like a normal 40-minute took 3 hours to get there. So which was a bit crazy. Don't worry, Adrian, I haven't put any Avengers slides in here, so you'll still be able to, won't violate any copyright laws. Now, so lots of different risk factors. Now, the interesting thing is very little of that you've got control over as a driver. So your velocity has not got that much to do with the skill of your skill as a driver. Obviously, you have a terrible driver, you might have more chance of having an accident and it might negatively impact your journey time. But your skill as a driver and the car you drive as well, whether you drive an, 1100 Hyundai or a big 3-liter Ford, not going to make a massive difference to your velocity. It's the same thing with tools in your team. Provided you've got reasonable tools, you're not driving a tuk-tuk or something like that, or having to walk, but provided you've got reasonable tools, not going to have a massive influence on your velocity. And it's also not about how hard you drive, okay? You can't just drive faster. Most of those factors are in the structure and environment in which you are, and that then becomes leadership or management's role is to create the structure and environment for teams to be successful. So very often, leaders will say, can't you just work harder? We've got all this delivery pressure, just deliver more. But most cases, most teams are working as hard as they can, delivering as much as they can within the constraints and the environments in which they're placed. Now, the other interesting thing with relative size is that we can start comparing totally different things with each other, which is another advantage of it. So for example, if I said, let's just say, consider your morning commute to be a 3, we could say, well, what's washing the dishes? Okay, what's mowing the lawn? So we can start comparing completely different things with each other. So it doesn't just have to be software. It could be spikes, enablers, all sorts of stuff, whatever the team is doing. And we can do relative sizes on those. Just another factor to consider around risk. So obviously, journey to and from the office is reasonably predictable. Okay, so it's reasonably predictable, but we can't control everything. The type of work you're doing might vary somewhat on the scale of a bullet train in Japan, which is incredibly predictable, to Shackleton exploring the Antarctic, or that period of exploring. So obviously, there's a massive amount more risk here. Despite whatever plans you put in place, the pack ice might set in 1 week into your journey, you're stuck there for a year, okay, which is what happened to him, or longer, as compared to high predictability. Now, often if you chat to executives or you chat to leaders, they want all the work that's done, features and stories and so on, to be like a train ride, okay, completely predictable. The key message here, or the point here, which I'll make when I'm chatting to leaders, is that there's a huge amount of investment which has gone into that train network, but also it's very, very constrained. So you cannot deviate 1 centimeter off the train track, or if you are, you're going to crash. Now, obviously, a small deviation from a station is not going to cost you much in the terms of time. But if you wanted to go halfway between 2 stations, or you wanted to go a few blocks, and you add on all of those things, it actually adds on a huge amount of time. So we don't have a lot of very good public transport in South Africa, in Johannesburg. But we do have we have got a world-class, what they call the Gautrain, between the airports and various areas. Now, I have gone on the Gautrain into downtown Johannesburg when my car was in for a service. And although the train journey itself is incredibly quick, if you add on all the rest of the steps, it'll take me 2 to 3 times longer to get to my desk in the office than if I drove there in rush hour traffic. So it's just the reality, the reality of it. Now, often we are doing these kind of things. So if you are doing, these green fields type things, we've got to realize that you cannot have high predictability. We still want to plan, and we still want to estimate, but the estimates are going to be a lot less accurate than if you are doing more predictable type of work. So I just wanted to cover, this is my terminology that I use. So I do a lot of work when I work in the Scaled Agile framework. So just kind of drawing on their definitions. Now you might call these something different, but I just wanted to use this just to standardize for this talk. Perfectly fine if you do, but these are my definitions, or drawing on the safe Scaled Agile definitions. So a feature, okay. So feature is a chunk of value, okay. So you could think of it being something like password reset. So the example here is obviously, how you would reset your password on Google. the way you reset it on Google is very different to Facebook. It's very different to other apps. To your internet banking would have a different profile. Your work reset would have a different one. But the need is universal. The ability to reset my password securely without talking to a human, or talking to a call center. That's the need. How we achieve that on our system might be very, very different. So this is servicing the need, okay, but it's not telling us how we're actually doing it. And we'll typically usually do that with user stories. So kind of user stories we might have off this as things like locking the account. We can write the code and build the test for locking the account, ensuring only for the relevant user, not the entire database, validate the user, update audit log, usually a whole lot of other stories. Now, ideally, we want our stories to be quite small so that they can be delivered in true increments, and ideally we're making a progress on a daily basis. You can see the your burn up chart proceeding on a daily basis. Now, I just want to quickly say that the original intent for user stories, the credit for user stories, coining the term, I think Rachel Davies was credited with that, although it was popularized by other people, and then she credits her team. But it was meant as a placeholder for future discussion, and kind of we're using it in exactly the opposite way in most organizations, is for detailed analysis and stuff, which is the opposite was originally intended. But regardless of that, you can think about these as being small chunks of value coming through. And then an epic might be something like improved self-service, on the Gringotts banking system, just dropping in a Harry Potter reference there, which might mushroom out into a whole lot of other features which you might build, of which password reset is just one. Now, if you think about it, if you're a user, you don't care that the code is there to lock the account, validate you, update the audit log. What do you care about? When can you log back into the system? So that's the important part. So that's where you get the value as a user. Each one of these that's complete, we know that we are one step closer to achieving the value. So it's almost like save game. So particularly when we're trying to size stories, and that's where we're going to lead now, you really want to get your stories to be sized correctly. And in software, you could always size them smaller, because you could literally do it for one single test case if you wanted to. Okay, but we'll look at what's the right size. That's normally team dependent. Now, just if you're struggling with this concept, I like analogies. So I've got one here. What's an epic? What's a feature? And what's a user story? Sure, we've all watched lots of Netflix or our favorite streaming shows. You can consider a season of a TV show as being like an epic. We're giving my age away, using Seinfeld as the example. A feature would be a single episode, and a user story might be like a scene from the episode. So as a viewer, you don't want to watch each scene as it's complete. You want to watch the completed episode. But each scene that is complete, you know that you're closer to airing the episode. And actually, I sometimes use that also, tying it back to analysis and so on. You might have a script, but you don't necessarily need to stick religiously to the script, because you might come up with better jokes, better ways of doing it during the filming process and when the actors are involved. Almost like the developers, I guess you could look at them as being. Okay, so you want some adaptability in the process. So that leads us on to what I like to call an exercise. And this will be in that worksheet as well, so an Excel spreadsheet. So if you want to do this in your own time, you can do it. If you want to try it on other people, you can do it. So it's a very simple test, which should get 100% predictable results, or the overall result. So basically what you do inside this test, estimate your time. For the formulas just to work in the spreadsheet, you've got to put 0 for hours, otherwise it doesn't work. But basically going up for your best guess is how long would it take you, your best effort, to do 1 kilometer, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, obviously getting up, half marathon, 42 kilometers, Comrades, which is the biggest, most famous race in South Africa, 90 kilometers, we'll talk about that a bit later, up to 100 miles. I've never done 100 miles myself, but there are people who are crazy enough to go and run that far. And then you'll give your estimate confidence and your comfort level. Now, you'll see a result like this. Okay, so this is, I said, for a very average ultra runner. I should probably say a very average ultra runner before pre-COVID. And no surprises. I would expect, obviously, the actual amount of time might vary in the confidence level depending on how fit you are and whether or not you are a runner or not, how far you normally run. So as the volume increases, our velocity decreases, our confidence and our comfort levels also will decrease. So really, increasing volume decreases predictability. So what we want to try and achieve is get the right, when we're sizing our stories, is to get them the right amount. Now, what's the right amount? Well, it depends on your team. It's definitely not a marathon. Okay, it's probably not a 21-kilometer half marathon or 10 kilometers. Maybe for some teams it is 5 kilometers. Maybe for some it's 1 or somewhere in between. It's also not 10 meters or 100 meters. That's too short. The overheads of doing that are too high. So you'd need to try and figure out in your team equivalently what's the right amount for the optimal delivery. So let's look at the best, what I'm going to call now the results. These are the actual results for arguably the best ultramarathon runner in the world. So who is that? I'm calling this lady here Camille Herron. She's an American runner. Why do I say she's the best ultramarathon runner in the world? Well, she holds 7 ultramarathon world records. She's the only athlete to win all 3 of the IAU's ultra-distance events. And in South Africa, you only consider a real runner, even by non-runners, by the way, if you've run the comrades. You can run 100 marathons, but if you haven't done the comrades, people look at you like, man, you're not a real runner. And she won. So if you want to be the best ultramarathon runner in the world, you've got to have 1 comrade. And she did win it in 2017. So incidentally, I like using, as part of my training, feminist approach. I said I'll include that. I like having strong female protagonists in my presentation. So trying to cover that base. And here I'm also going to cover the beer angle as well. So perhaps the most impressive thing, or the thing that resonates with me the most about Camille Herron, she drinks beer as part of her in-race nutrition while she's breaking world records. So even when she won comrades, and I did ask her which beer she drank, so she did drink a beer mixed with ginger beer. Her husband, who's in the picture there, was seconding her along the route, and she had a Jack Black beer. So I did try a Jack Black beer in my last comrades. This is about 65 kilometers into the race. This is what I call a smimus. It's half a smile, half a grimace. So I probably look a lot better in that photo than what I feel. Still about 25 Ks to go. I did really enjoy the beer, but it did nothing for my time. So it works for her, it didn't work for me in my time. Anyway, so let's look at her personal best. So I asked her if she could give me them. These are her personal bests over varying distances. She's never raced a kilometer, but 800 meters she gave the time. And no surprises, whether you are an average runner or you are the best ultramarathon runner in the world, the same result applies. As distance increases, so as the size increases, the velocity decreases. Okay, so now you'll see there's 2 marathon times, and I've highlighted one in a different color. What is that time over there? That is the Guinness World Record for the fastest marathon run in a superhero outfit. So she ran a marathon in 2:48, which I can tell you is pretty quick as Spider-Woman, but it's about 12 minutes slower than her best marathon time. And she gave this quote after the race saying, yeah, it was much tougher than I expected, going 20 seconds per mile slower than what I'd expect, just couldn't seem to go any faster. So 2 things I take from this is, 1, don't make your employees wear stupid outfits. So in the office environment, the equivalent to be jacket and tie, let them be comfortable. You'll get optimal performance out of them. But I guess the main point is how big an impact the structure and environment actually makes to optimal performance. So once again, for leaders, your job, create the structure and environment to get the best out of your athletes. Okay, so I want to leave some time for questions. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what we've covered, just to highlight the points. So yeah, I like talking about agile. I like talking about running. So we can talk about both at the same time. I'm in heaven. So just a couple more running analogies before we finish up and go to question time. So are these 2 marathons the same size? They're both 42.2 kilometers. So hopefully you'll all look at this and go, no, they're not the same size. They're the same distance. The volume is the same, but obviously what you would expect is this one on the left starting I think that's about 600 meters above sea level, and he slowly, gently, nicely, gradually dropped down to sea level to the beautiful coastline in East London, Buffalo City in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. So you see nice, gentle downhills all the way. As opposed to this one over here, this is in a place called Clarens in the Free State, near the Lesotho border. And you start over a mile above sea level. You get almost 200 meters above sea level, and you can see it's an out and back course. You run 21.1 kilometers out, you turn around and you run straight back again. And you can see you've got these like crab crawl pincers over here. It's actually called Surrender Hill Marathon. So you go up and down Surrender Hill, which is a Boer War site. And I can tell you that the uphills are bad, but the downhills are even worse because they absolutely shatter your quads. And then you've got to go back up the same damn hills again. Okay, so same distance, but definitely you wouldn't expect to be able to achieve the same time in both of those different courses. Now, this is the Comrades Marathon. So Comrades is rather sadistic. They count down in kilometers. So 42.2 kilometers, I can tell you that's the longest marathon you'll ever run. And as you can see here, it messes with your head. This kind of looks like the cast of The Walking Dead lurching towards, I think in this case, Pietermaritzburg. It was an uprun that year. You run between Durban and Pietermaritzburg. So Comrades Marathon, because my last example is going to be from that. It's the largest, the oldest, the greatest ultramarathon in the world. There's about 20,000 people who run it every year. It's in the middle of winter, middle of South African winter, but it's the longest day of the year for the runners who are running that race. We'll see now how many people actually finish that. Of those 20,000, majority of them are South Africans who would run that race. So for those of you familiar with the Agile Manifesto, would have heard of the statement, responding to change or following a plan. So I'm going to show you how this would apply in ultra running and also to what we've covered so far. So if you enter at the start line, or when you get to the Comrades Marathon, you've got a plan. It's a long way. So it's 90 kilometers, I said 56 miles for those who haven't upgraded to the metric system. You get pacing bands, or like this gentleman over here, you get temporary tattoos. Plan A, 9 hours. Plan B, 10 hours. Plan C, just finish the thing and not end up in the medical tent. Okay, so everyone will enter with a plan. There's lots of hills along the way and so on. So you have different times where you want to be at certain places. So this is a graph where I've tracked the number of people who started the race, the people who actually crossed the starting line, how many ended up crossing the finish line and actually collecting a medal. And since the turn of the millennium, since the year 2000. And you'll see here that most years, mid-80s, occasionally goes just above 90%, but there's a big anomaly in the year 2013. So I guess, what happened in 2013? And the simple answer is the weather. None of us can control the weather. So it started off fairly cool. It was an uprun that year, so from the coast of Durban up to Pietermaritzburg, but it quickly got quite hot. And at the same time, you had gusty gale force winds, and it was dry and dusty. And all the runners have got a plan. And we're quite good at plans. We're also quite good at sticking to plans. We're not that good actually at trying to change plans when they're unrealistic. And this is what happened to a large part of the field, is the conditions were not conducive to performing according to the original plan. A lot of the field weren't able to adapt that plan early enough, so they pushed on, and the vast majority of them, so in this year, almost half the field, so 45% of the starters ended up not finishing the race, because they're burnt out. So the key message here is that, and it's kind of the final message I'll just leave you with. So we do our estimates, but there's always risk. Now, we can't control risk. If your plan and if your estimates prove to be impractical and unreasonable, change those estimates. Okay, and change them as soon as you can. Sticking to unrealistic estimates for too long will just end up to burning out the team, more defects, people leaving the team, people getting despondent. You'll get a worse result than you would if you adjust that plan. So thanks very much for your time. I haven't seen what questions are there, but I can see the light flashing that there are some there. So Adrian, I'll let you decide which questions get asked and in which order.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Thank you, Stuart. And I'm sure everyone is now giving you a virtual round of applause. It's always a bit weirder in the virtual world, not getting the real round of applause. But lots of stuff in the chat and the Q&A. So we'll cover as many questions as we can. So if you're attending live, do type your question in the chat, or ideally in the Q&A. But I'll try and cover off from both. So first question, JJ asks, is risk the same as the amount of unknowns in realizing a feature, or is that just one part of the risks?
So it's just one part. So unknowns would be one part, but it will also be ambiguity. Even if you think about it, the skill level of the developer, of the analyst, of the tester who's going to work on that story or that feature is actually also a risk factor. So normally when you'd say for an average skilled person, but if you've got this, you say, I'll just use the development aspect of it. Obviously, if you've got a really experienced person, you expect them to do it quite a lot quicker than a junior person who's joined the team. So yeah, just one aspect of it. There's a few different things to consider with the risks.
Yeah. Perfect. I think it's either Liz or Lizzle says, or possibly Lizelle. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. At what point do you settle on a velocity? All the teams I've been involved in always aim to push to increase the velocity, and this is something I've seen a lot. And I guess springboarding from that, you sort of made the point that you can't just drive the car harder, type of thing to get. So how do you settle on a velocity?
So the easiest way to do it is if you're doing sprints or iterations, it's the average of your last three. Obviously, assuming that they're normal sprints. If you've had a production outage or there's been a big holiday period, just don't count that one. So 3 normal sprints, the average. Now, the key thing is if the team is trying to improve it, it should be the team, not management pushing down as a performance metric. Otherwise, people will game it. 100% chance they will just game the system. So it's a team measure. And obviously, it's interesting for the team if they normally say deliver 50 story points and they suddenly deliver 55. What went right? If they deliver less, what went wrong? Now, for most teams, there's maybe certain things which they can do to get better. Often it's things like story sizing. You do smaller stories, lean 101, smaller things flow through your system faster. Half the size is not half the risk, it's about a quarter of the risk. So teams will sometimes get better and they might increase their velocity, but normally then they hit a ceiling. And the only way you can then increase it is by changing the structure and environment. So drawing back to the example I used of the commuting, driving around in your car, things like synchronizing the traffic lights. Mm-hmm. You can't, the driver, the equivalent of your leaders need to go and change the environment, to optimize for the flow. It's very rarely about people working harder. Sometimes they can't just work harder because you've got delivery pressure. The interesting thing, I've got an interesting story about that one, which I've seen, and maybe an extreme case, but where as a coach, I was called in after the fact. I had worked with this team a few years before, and they were in crisis. And basically, when I worked with them, what it turned out to be was, depending who you talk to in the team, they either were coerced, naively agreed, or were forced into doubling their velocity commitment. So I think their velocity was normally at 40, and they took on 75. In that sprint, they ended up delivering 10. So they delivered a quarter of what they normally did because of all the stress, the churn, everything else. The 10 that they delivered was such bad quality, they spent the next 2 iterations unpicking the knitting. So instead of doing 120 over 3 iterations, 3 sprints, they ended up delivering 10. And why were they forced, or why did they commit? Because of delivery pressure. And obviously, you've got the human costs of disengaged people, burnout, and lack of trust between the team themselves and management and all of those nasty things that go with it. So if you see those results, I mean, velocity for me is once you see those results, if a manager did that again, or the same manager did it again, quite frankly, they should go for a disciplinary hearing for being there, because you'll always see that result. Now, occasionally, you might be able to, team might get a small jump. And when I say a small jump, it's like 10, 15, maximum 20%, but it's not sustainable. And you'll see, normally what you'll see is very quickly thereafter, velocity will drop because people get burnout.
Yeah. To
the running analogy, it's like starting out, say, a marathon too fast. You'll get to a certain point faster, but then the rest will go a lot slower, and you radically increase your risk of not finishing and of getting injured.
Yeah, ending up in the medical tent instead of at the finish line. So, wow, okay. So I'm going to combine 2 questions now, so because they're kind of similar. So Louise says the first number used was estimated based on something you knew. In your example, like the picture in your example, a dev may well have been calculated off of size. Mentally, I still look at the work and go, well, that's an hour, that's 2 hours, and size it for the comparison. How do you get out of that mindset? What techniques have you got to just do a comparison rather than like mentally converting it to hours and then back again? And then a similar question from JJ. JJ says, prior to starting a sprint, our developers add an hourly estimate to each story to know when they reach their capacity. Sometimes that feels a bit redundant. Do you have any thoughts on that topic? So sort of molding those together, how can we get either ourselves or our stakeholders to shift away from like triangulating everything back to hours or days and to thinking more relatively?
So it's hard. You've almost got to, because normally what you do is you'll calibrate initially. Once you do that, you've almost got to scrub your brain. You've got to force yourself to stop going this many hours there for this size or this many days of size, and actually start comparing. So you've got to, and it's something that if you do it deliberately, you'll quite quickly pick it up, but it is hard initially to do it. And normally, if you've got a scrum master in your team, you're trying to get the scrum master to keep everyone honest on that, because people will, they have 3 days, no, well, compared to this, and sometimes you can pick a story compared to this one. It doesn't have to be a one. Of most training courses will say you compared to the one, but sometimes it's easier to pick something more in the middle. Like, and with stories, you don't really want to go, even 5 is quite big. I wouldn't want to go bigger than that if you're using Fibonacci sequence, but I would maybe pick a 2 or 3, and then you can go relative to that. Because the thing about the animal slide there, if you take a 3, and obviously a hippo is quite a big animal, so you might have gone whatever, hippo is a 5 or an 8, you can then do a whole lot of different animals to it. So if you saw, I don't know, a picture of a mongoose, you'd say, well, that's definitely a 1 compared to the hippo. Whereas if hippo is a 3 and you've got a mongoose, it's okay, well, it's way, way smaller than that.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think the second part, it does sound like the hours, that would sound like an anti-pattern from the little bit that was put into that question. You kind of, teams that work through this, they quite quickly get onto the same kind of wavelength, and you can get predictability. And that's really, and I think I did see a question in chat, predictability of what? It's predictability about what the team can deliver. If you're doing a 2-week sprint, in that 2 weeks, with 1 week, it's 1 week, or whatever your period is, so that you consistently, like it's equivalent of Eliud Kipchoge, every week of the year, you're delivering a consistent amount. So you're jogging at a comfortable pace every week of the year. So and actually, I mean, for those who follow the Agile manifesto, one of the principles there is around sustainable delivery. So it's one of the ways you can get sustainable delivery, where people are working a set amount. They're not having to work radical overtime, huge pressure to get stuff in. It's predictable. Should be quite those challenges. The work should be interesting, but the pressure should be boring.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I think you've quite neatly addressed David's question there about predictability as well. So we'll just take a couple more because we've got a few more minutes. So Jason asks, what tips do you have for organizations who have many feature teams operating or many feature teams operating seemingly different point currencies?
So perhaps slightly controversial one. So I mentioned, I'm one of those agile coaches who actually quite likes scaled agile. Okay, so I quite like SAFe. Yes, not all parts of it, and it's often but by and large, I quite like it. Now, one of the controversial parts of SAFe is they try to get normalized estimation. I actually also quite like normalized estimation, but provided it's not used as a management measure, as a performance measure, because then it will get corrupted. So, if you've got a kind of standard where, and what SAFe kind of recommends is half a day dev, half a day test. Yes, there'll be analysis as well, but that's their recommendation. Call that a 1, everything else relative to it. So then you've got some idea, if you're looking at different teams, you don't want one team's, sort of 20 to be another team's 100. So you've got some level and, of overall, kind of understanding. And if you're working in bigger groups, teams of teams, like an agile release train or something like that, you've got some idea also overall, how much does your train deliver? Because that's also normally going to be pretty constant. And normally also the only way you can significantly get jumps, once again, is by leaders sorting out the inefficiencies in the system, creating the structure and environment, to improve. But otherwise, you're going to find that as a whole, it's going to be quite consistent.
Yeah. That kind of, in a way, leads on to Michael's question, which is how do you account for overheads and settling in? So the analogy he uses here is like, if you're running, putting on your shoes, getting the starter gun and then either bursting out of the blocks in a mad rush or versus easing into it. And I suppose in a project or product environment, there's those kind of overheads as well, and there's that settling in period. How do you account for those sorts of things?
So I guess if you're working in Scrum or in a consistent sort of pattern of sprints and iterations, you've got consistent overhead every 2 weeks or every week. Of your stand-ups, your retrospectives, your reviews, your iteration planning. So it becomes more predictable what those specific overheads are. There might be additional things which creep in. So one of the interesting ones, if you've got a new team member comes in, new developer, new analyst, someone else joins your team, you would actually expect your velocity will drop initially.
Yeah.
Because why? Because they're going to suck time and effort as you go up the learning curve from the productive team members. Obviously, over time, you would hope that it goes up, but you will see it will drop. So you can start, obviously, if you know that overhead's coming in. So you want the overhead to be the predictable overhead of your ceremonies if you're using an agile framework. If there's unpredictable stuff coming in, you'd want to know what that is. Now, occasionally it might be whatever your CEO calls an emergency meeting. Well, that's just something that you deal with. But if it's the bad planning or people calling workshops for stuff which is not part of your immediate plan, well, ideally you shouldn't actually attend, or your team shouldn't be distracted, from the goal which they've committed to. What I'd say is, if someone does, for political reasons, have to take one for the team, well, hopefully if you've got a scrum master or a product owner, well, they're that person who can go there, so the rest of the team carries on with meeting the iteration goal.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Well, I mean, Stuart, we could carry on. I feel we could carry on talking for hours about this. It's a really really interesting topic, but we're just approaching the end of our allotted time. So thank you so much, Stuart, for such a fascinating and practical conversation. Just before, if you're attending live, just before you go, just a few things to let everyone know about. So first of all, I've put, Stuart, I've put your LinkedIn details in the chat. How is the best way for people to connect with you, find out more about what you do? They can check out your blog and LinkedIn, but anything else that people should be aware of?
Yeah, LinkedIn, blog. Also a big proponent to follow back on Twitter. So if anyone wants to follow me, I've got a quite a popular running account and a not so popular professional account. But if anyone hits me up there, I'll follow you back and connect me that way. LinkedIn's always good as well. My blog as well. It's Running Man with 2 N's. If you Google that, it's .cozor.com. We'll go through there.
Fantastic. So definitely do
the agile link on that one will go to all the agile articles. All the rest is running.
Fantastic. So definitely do connect with Stuart. I always think that it's like like if this was a real event, you'd give Stuart a big round of applause. Now, the sort of connecting and staying in touch, that's like your virtual round of applause. So do be sure to connect. I just want to now have a look at the mural board, which let's see how people are. So we've got lots and lots on the mural board. So we've got stuff about predictability, terminology. Compare this to the thing we did last week. How big is this? So I think people have got quite a useful set of notes here. So I will share this on LinkedIn after. So I'll leave it open. If you're on the mural board, I'll leave it open for a few more minutes, then I will close it after the session. What I also wanted to let everyone know about, who is, well, whether you're attending live or indeed watching the recording, is there's a whole bunch of other webinars. Of course, I try and run about one a month. You'll find all of our events on the website. There are the courses, paid for courses, but also free webinars. So if you click on webinars, you'll see that the next webinar is exploring the BA role in agile discovery. It's an interactive panel on December the 2nd. So do join us for that. That's filling up, as they do tend to, filling up quite quickly. So be sure to hit that one up and register. So all that's left for me to say is, again, a massive thank you, Stuart, for taking time out to speak and share your wisdom and expertise with us. It's very, very much appreciated. A massive thank you to everyone who has tuned in live or watched the recording. Do stay in touch, connect with each other and with us on LinkedIn, and hope to see you somewhere soon. So thanks again, Stuart. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Adrian, and thanks everyone for attending. Cheers.
Take care. Bye. Bye, everyone.